Today's topic is auto numbering. I'm using DDM to manage this as a mini project, and in the Actions tab in the preview screen at the bottom I've got the topics that we're going to cover. Seems like an awful lot, but hopefully they won't take too long. So first of all, where is the auto number generation tool? I'm going to log into DDM administration. Okay, and under the Tools menu, we have our Auto Number Administration, and I'm going to open that now. Okay, so this is where we build our auto numbering inside this tool, and we're going to step through all of the options in a minute. Okay, so that's where to find the tool. The next thing, I'm just going to say we've completed that. The next thing we're going to look at is the admin system config area. If I go back to the administration tool, inside system config, in here we can specify for parts, drawings and documents the default numbering selection. What we have here is called predefined by request. This is auto numbering. The options we have in here is that it's either a user-defined number, as in manually typed in, or it's predefined by request. Now I tend to default to these options, and I also include manual numbering option in the auto number generator. Okay, so admin system config settings. Okay. Complete. Now, if we look in the auto number tool, we can assign numbering to items and folders. If I go back into this tool, for example, default parts and assemblies. So in my system, I've got numbering set up. Let me just bring this over here like this. In fact, I'm just going to start this little tool here called Sizer, so I can resize these windows. I didn't do the right thing, sorry, hold on. Sizer, run this application. Okay, and I'm just going to do this. So this is my numbering for default parts and assemblies, and we can see over on the right hand side that this is made available only to parts and assemblies, not drawings, documents or folders. Okay. So for each different type of numbering that is configured, and I've got a customer example here, again, this example is assigned to parts, assemblies, drawings, and documents. Okay, so when you build your numbering, you can specify what type of object it relates to. If we then go back into DDM and we look at attributes against parts and assemblies, the number, let me just do this, item number in here, my default numbering is default parts and assemblies. So against the attribute itself, you can specify which is the default, and we can see here the various options that I've now got available. So I use default parts and assemblies as my default number. Okay. What that means is if I'm inside DDM and, for example, I say new part to create a new part record, the default will be that numbering selection. If I choose the auto number generator button at the icon at the end of the field, I can choose some of the other numbering in here. Okay, so I'm going to cancel that because I don't want to create anything. So that is how to assign numbering to item types. Okay. We can do exactly the same thing for folders, assigning the numbering to folders. If we go back into the auto number generation tool, for example, for folder actions for tasks, we've got the defined type of numbering, but this is only assigned to folder types. So here we switch on folders. Okay, if I close that, in addition to that, under my folders folder types, if I go into tasks, I've set my auto numbering. I've said I want only this type of numbering available, and it is the default. You see the drop down in the top window here. So you can have multiple numbering options available for items and folders and actions. In this case, I've said I always want a task number and I want it to be the default. Okay, so the same applies for all folder types. So let's look at the different types of numbering that we've got available, and we're going to begin with manual numbers. Okay, so if I go back to my numbering generator, I have an option in here called manual numbering, and by the way, you can right click in the blank space and add new numbering. Okay, so my manual numbering, I've literally given it a title, and we've said that this is a free text field, and I don't need to specify anything beyond that. And we can have manual numbering for parts, assemblies, drawings, documents, and folders. There is an additional setting here called site. If you have a replicated environment, you can specify if a numbering generator is related to a specific site or all sites. You only have the option of one or all. Okay, mine is not replicated anymore, so I just use all sites. So that manual number option, okay, means that if I'm in here and I say file, new, part number, although I've set my default to my default parts and assemblies, if I choose manual number, I can now type in a number that I require. Okay, so I'm just going to cancel that. So this is manual numbering. Now, when you're applying manual numbering, you have the option of configuring the dynamic search, and I'll show you what that is. There are system defaults. There are also defaults by business unit. So if I go into the tool here, there are two fields here: default number of characters required before a search is made, and I've set my default to 10, and the minimum number of characters allowed in this mode is 4. So the default is 10, but a user can reduce the number down to 4 characters. So let's see how this works. It's particularly useful if you've got large databases, or if you're using manual numbering and you want to avoid duplications or see what the next number is. So I'm going to say create new number. There's lots of different ways to do this. I'm just going to say new. When I go to manual numbering, I've got this set at, well, so the default would have been 10. Okay. So this is where you see this number. You have the option of turning this off if you don't want to use it. The minimum I can set this to is, if I try and go to 3, no, the minimum is 4 as defined in the admin tool. So it's now set down to 4. What that means is, if I start to type in a number, when I get to 4 characters, it will automatically start to list items that already exist in the database. Very useful. And as I continue to type, it continues to filter. So what we're now seeing, let me just resize this window. What we're now seeing is, based on this that I've typed in as a manual number, I already have numbers in the system. So I can quite clearly see that, you know, if I was creating a shaft that was 310 long, I see the logic of how somebody's building the number. So I could type in hyphen 310, and I then know that is a unique number in the database. I go back, there's a 300, but not A310. I think it's a particularly useful feature, especially if you have a large database and you're using lots of manual numbering. Okay, I'm going to cancel that, okay, because there's another setting here where you can override the defaults based on different business units. Again, it's particularly useful for large organizations if you have different divisions that are using different business units. Business units has been covered on a previous session, business units. So if you have any questions on that, there is a video available. Now, if I go back to the admin tool and I go to my business units, the examples that I have in place, for example, is I could say, well, as a member of the engineering business unit, you can override the defaults. Let me just do this. And in here, default number of characters required before a search is made. So we might want to restrict this down and say, well, no, the default is now 8, but this person can go as low down as 2 characters. Now, obviously, you want to, if business units applies to you, you don't want to reduce this number too small, because otherwise it's doing a very big query based on a short number of characters. Okay, so the ability to override the system default with business unit related defaults. I'm going to cancel that because I don't want to keep that. Now, that change, I believe, does require a re-login of the DDM Office client. There are certain changes in the administration that require the user to log out and log in again before it reads it, because I think we cache that information in the background to make it run faster. Okay, so dynamic search mode, system setting, and business unit based settings. Okay, let me just set these to complete. Now, when we're building numbering, the different types of numbering that we can have is straight sequential numbers or logical numbers. And when we build our numbers, we can use incrementers. Okay, so we're going to look at all of these options now. So I'm going to go into here, and if I was creating a new numbering selection, I would say, let's call it workshop. Okay, workshop numbering. I might want to put a prefix of something like that, WSP. Now, I could just say the last incremental number might be 256. If I specify that number, it's because I'm introducing DDM to start off where we manually got to outside of the system. So if I was building workshop numbering and the manual way that we did it historically finished at 255, if I put 256 in here, the first number that it's going to generate, the last number was 256. The first number that DDM will create will be 257. Now, an important point here is, once this numbering tool has allocated a number, if you delete the number inside DDM, it cannot automatically regenerate that number for you. So once a number has been allocated, the number is gone. So just to be aware of that. You could manually add the number at a later date. This is basically simple sequential numbering where you're specifying the sequence directly related to the numbering type. Okay. The next option we have, so this is basic sequential numbering. The next one is building logical numbers. So rather than creating a new example, I'm going to close this. Yes, because I've got some examples in here of numbering that I've created over time for various customers. I've changed the customers' names to numbers, obviously, because we don't want to be saying who people are. If I pick on this first example, this numbering is called customer 001. Rather than specifying the prefix or the numbers at the top level, what we're saying is the first thing that you need to do is choose a commodity group, because there's a next level down. So these logical numbers are on the basis of picking your number by logical selection. Okay, so the first level goes down to 4 choices. If I go into electronics, you then have 4 choices below this, and it's stepping down at each level. So at each level, when we start to now choose a diode, it starts to apply the number, prefixing 102 hyphen. Okay, so there are various examples in here. The next one, again, you're choosing options as you drill down, and it's building the part number for you. So let's see how that looks in real time. In fact, if I pick on this one, number 4, oh no, ATA. So ATA 100 is an aerospace numbering definition. In this one, we've got who the company is. Okay, so you're picking the originating source, and its prefixes with a C or a D. If I choose CSI, you're then picking a system code which prefixes 00 or 10. So as you drill down at every level, you're specifying what the next digits are. Right, let me come all the way out of here. If I go back into DDM and we go to create a new part now, rather than having my default numbering, this time I want to choose ATA 100 numbering. I start to get these questions now. What is the originating source? I will pick CSI, and it's put the D in place. System code, general product 00. What is the subsystem code? Worthiness. We get a 04. So as I'm stepping through the questions, it's building the logical part number below. Now, the end of this numbering is the sequential number, which in this case is 4 digits incrementing. So this is an example of logical part numbers that you can define the logic for. Let me cancel out of there. So, logical numbers. The next thing to talk about is the incrementers, the sequence generator. And we've got standard incrementers, unique or shared. Now the standard incrementer that I showed you as an example is, for example, sorry, bad example. If I go into, no, apologies, against numbering 001, we're using an incrementer 001 here, and I've named them the same so they link together. The standard one is if you're building your own numbering. Let's just type something in there. Let's type in a prefix of Joe, and let's have a hyphen, and I could just type in what is the next number. So this is what I would class as a standard incrementer related to only this numbering sequence. Okay, cancel that. This one example is when we get to the end of our logic, we're choosing a shared incrementer. So we've created a number incrementer specifically for this logical part numbering. Okay, if I close out of here, here is the incrementer, and the last incremental number was number 1. So you can build your own incrementers, give it a name, and tell it what the last number, again, what sites does it relate to. Okay, so you've either got one that you type in directly in the definition, or you can specify a shared incrementer that could be unique to that particular numbering sequence. Or the final option, so this is a standard incrementer that you type in. You can have an incrementer that's unique to a numbering system. One that I'm very fond of is a shared common incrementer. What do I mean by that? If we go into here, I've got one in here called shared incrementer. And you'll see in here, called standard incrementer, and you'll see that I've used it for nearly all of my folder types and for my default parts, drawings and documents. Okay, this is clearly my own personal preference. You decide what's right for your business. I use a standard incrementer for all of these types because it means that when I create an item, so if I just create a test part and I just call this test, okay, I'm going to drop it into a category. Let me just size these windows to make them pretty. And I'm going to say, I'm just going to put it in the import category like that. Okay, I need to specify, is it preferred or not? Yes, it's a spare item. Who is the supplier? So I've highlighted fields that I want to be filling in, etc., like so. And I say OK, and I need to reserve it into a folder. I'm just going to reserve it to my workbench. If I look in my workbench, it's given me the next number 34881 because I'm using the common shared incrementer. Because I'm using this standard incrementer for all of these object types, if the next thing I do is raise a change order, I'm using the same common increment. If I just type in a request and a reason, like so, it gets the next number, which is 34882. The reason I particularly like this is if I'm doing a query, if I grab that number or a part of that number and I run a search in the open database, searching across everything, I'm going to find typically one item, which is the folder that I've just created. If I search for 881, I'm finding something very specific and unique because I'm using that standard shared incrementer across all types. Why I think it's good is because if I search for item 216, I won't find a part 216 or a document 216 or a drawing 216, and I think it can be potentially confusing if you've got part 216, document 216 that are not related, or drawing 216. Typically the drawing would be okay because you typically have those the same, but I like to have a unique shared incrementer across the entire database. It's your choice. Clearly you decide what's right for your business, but I think it can be potentially very useful. Okay, if I go back to our workshops, okay, and the active one that we are working on, these are all my actions. This is for a standard shared incrementer. Okay. The next thing we have an option to do is linking the auto numbering to category. The way that this is set is under the system config. Number allocation is locked to category selection, or number allocation drives category selection. So I've switched this on. Okay, I normally do not have this switched on because for me it's not specific enough. Okay, now it might be for you, and the way that it works is if I go to my numbering, I've created a sample here, testing auto number linked to category. So I've created a numbering generator. I'm still using the shared incrementer, but I've prefixed it with TST for test. And when you switch on linking to category, you see in the field at the bottom here, you get this additional option where you can link part numbering to a specific category in the database. Like this, part numbering linked to category. So I've created a numbering and a category to demonstrate. Okay. When you do this, if I then create a new part, okay, if I link this, sorry, cancel. If I use the numbering that is linked to category, when I select that numbering, it's automatically selected the category for me. Okay, so you need to decide whether that's good for your business or not, or useful for your business. I don't like it because I like the category to be a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more specific, and building all of the time. Okay, but that's how you configure that as an option. I'm going to cancel that. So linking your numbering to categories so that when you choose your number, it chooses a specific category. You might have logical part numbers for nuts, bolts and washers, and it can automatically put things in a category. So there are instances where that's very useful, but it requires configuring it to begin with. Okay. The next one is the ability to link your numbering to specific groups in the business. Okay, i.e. restricting to specific groups. So let's go into the configuration. I've got a numbering set up here, auto number linked to group. Okay. If I open this numbering, you'll see now, because we've switched this option on, there's a section towards the bottom here where you can specify that this numbering is linked to a specific group. So I've got a group in DDM administration called Group Auto Numbering and Group Auto Numbering Test. Okay, so if I just close that, I have a group in the database that I've created specifically for auto numbering test. Now, the reason I've created one called group auto numbering is because when you switch this option on, you have to set the settings, otherwise it disables all numbering. So if you're going to turn this option on, I've made my life easy by having one group called auto numbering. And what I've done with this group here is I've gone through and in each of my business units, I've turned on all users so that all of the numbering is available as it would be by default. So it's a gotcha. If you turn on restriction by group, you have to define which groups have access to which numbers. Otherwise, you're going to get some errors and it will not assign any numbers at all. Okay, so it's very useful, but you need to configure it to work in the right way. So this is for all of my numbering. The one that we're specifically going to look at for testing is called Auto Numbering Test. Now, in here you will see that I've only added this user into this specific group in the various different business units relative to what business unit the object is in. So it's also relevant to business unit. Now, if I go into DDM and I want to create a new part and I choose numbering, I have the one for category, but I don't have the one linked to a specific group because I've not enabled it. So I'm going to cancel that. I'm going to go back into my auto number generator and I'm going to go into this numbering test. And if we look in the groups, I'm going to enable it for this test group. And only users in this group are allowed to use this numbering. It's now turned on. If I go back to DDM and I create an item, now I have the option to use this numbering specific to the group that I'm a member of. Okay, so potentially very useful. Again, if you've got different numbering for different groups in different business units, you can control it to that degree. Okay, so locking numbering to specific groups, but please remember, as soon as you turn that option on, I would create a specific group ready so that you can go through all of your numbering to make sure that you're switching it on for everybody. So you could tie yourselves in knots here. I'm hoping that's clear by what I'm showing you. Okay, but very useful if you need it. The second to last option here is against your default user profile, there's a web upload option. If you are a restricted web user, okay, so if I go to a particular user who is, let's say, supplier Amazon, okay, their default profile is restricted web user. So this supplier Amazon, if I do this, they are a member of a group called, it's a system group called restricted web users. Okay, but restricted web users still have the ability to create documents. If I go to that user's profile and I edit it, what we've said here is if they create a document through the web, I want it to use this automatic numbering. So you can choose which numbering is used for that restricted user if they create a document through the web client so that it just allocates a number. And I've got it set up this way for me because I want to be able to identify that this was a document that was uploaded by somebody outside. Okay, so just to be aware of that. Okay. Final thing to touch on is you can use your auto number generator when you are creating items, actions and folders automatically through a workflow process. Okay, I'm going to look at an example. So if I go into my admin tool, and by the way, if anybody is not familiar with workflow, we've got an advanced actions video. We've also got an advanced XML video as well. So that should show you all of the basics related to that. What we're covering today is the ability to assign automatic numbering. If I go to the admin tool and I go into my settings, I'm going to export my advanced workflow XML file onto the desktop. Okay, and we're going to look in this file. I want to edit with Notepad++. I'm going to start by folding everything. The workflow that I'm looking for is XML tests. So, create subfolder using the parent numbering or create a subfolder using auto numbering. Also, we can add a document using auto numbering. So let's look at this option. Okay. So, what we're saying is we're going to add a document. Okay, we're going to do an attribute check for this folder type. Attribute name is this. If the value is no, we want to create a document. We're going to use a template. We're going to put it under a new number. So the new item number here is the parent folder name. Okay, but the new, no, I picked a bad example. This one, if yes, sorry, that one was no. This one that says if the answer is yes, what we're actually going to do for the new item number is we're going to use auto numbering dot, and this string is the auto numbering. So if I, for example, go into my auto number generator for default documents, there is that string at the bottom, the internal sysid for this numbering sequence. It begins BDE, finishes in 450. If I go back to my XML, it begins BDE and it finishes 450. So that means then when we automatically create a new document from a template as part of this workflow, it will use that auto numbering. Okay, let me close that. Let me close that. And I'm just going to remove that from my system. I don't want to leave things behind. Okay, and I'm going to close my auto numbering generation. Also, if you're in here doing any kind of administration, at the top of this window, we've got some filters. So if you're only interested in looking for numbering for folders, we can turn the other ones and just filter them off. Obviously, if we just want to look at document numbering, we can do that. Numbers for parts and assemblies, so we can just filter these on and off so that you can see the wood for the trees. Okay. I'm going to close this. I'm going to close my admin tool. I'm going to hop back to my DDM. Set that task as complete. So, the topics that we've covered for auto numbering in DDM is where to find the tool in the administration, assigning the type of numberings you want in admin system config, assigning specifically to items, which are parts, assemblies, drawings and documents, folders and actions, manual numbering, dynamic searching when you're applying a manual number, system set or by business unit, sequential numbering, logical part numbering, a standard incrementer, a unique incrementer and a shared incrementer, linking numbering to categories, locking numbering to groups, the default numbering for restricted web users, and how to use auto numbering in the workflow XML code.